Hello, Twitch. How are we doing today? Welcome back. My name is James Spencer. I am a partner solutions architect here at AWS. And welcome to Howdy Partner. Joined by me today is a new face. How are you doing, Tiffany?
Doing great. Thanks, James. How's everyone doing?
Good, good. Happy to be here. Happy to learn about. We've had a lot of quantum partners on in the past. This one's a little different. Usually when we have quantum partners on, it's about like modeling and AI ML. This one will be kind of cool. It's a little more security based.
Yeah.
Specifically, and hello chat. If you have any questions, comments, please let us know. Please drop them in the chat. If you're new to Howdy Partner, let me just go over Howdy Partner real quick. This is our weekly Twitch show where we bring on AWS partners. They show us their solutions, what differentiates them, what helps make your life easier, solves your problems, makes things better, makes you more efficient, gets rid of that heavy lifting, and makes you a better business. Tiffany, what is encryption? I don't know. I got this job here at AWS, and I don't know how because I don't know much about it. So
So encryption is something that is pretty commonplace. It's this process where you encode information and you basically what you do is you convert it from its original format that's typically readable, and then you change it to some alternative format that is unreadable, and that is done through, some fancy encryption algorithms, and usually there's things like keys involved. And so with that, you can do things like make the format readable again or not readable with these different keys and algorithms. And so, here at AWS, we care a lot about encryption and security. And so, we have different services as well that help, help customers accomplish this and, get where they need to be in their security journey.
Yeah, and I've heard of there's a lot of types of encryption, but some of the big ones are in transit and at rest. You want to make sure that if you have data stored somewhere, that if we're just gonna say if for God knows why someone got a hold of it, they don't know what it means. They're not able to actually understand it. As you said, it's unreadable. You don't have the key. Like it's literally just like a lock basically. And in transit, I'm sure many of you have browsers with that nice little lock on the top. If you ever see a website that does not have that lock, be careful because what you are sending could be intercepted possibly by some middleman, some bad actor. You want to make sure whenever you're sending stuff over, it is encrypted in transit as well. But that's enough for me. Why don't we bring on some experts? They're much more knowledgeable than I, and they're going to show us how to do quantum encryption amongst some other things. So let's bring on our friends from Qrypt, Denis and Greg. How are you doing today, guys? How are we doing?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yep, glad to be here.
Great. Denis, let's start with you. Who are you? You're the CTO, it says.
Yeah, I'm the CTO and co-founder of Qrypt. I'll say a little bit more about myself in a couple of slides so you get a sense of why we started Qrypt and where we're going in this industry.
Awesome. Cool. Greg, how are you?
Very good. Director of Solutions Engineering, Qrypt, 20 years in cyber, Palo Alto Networks, Checkpoint Software. Glad to be here.
Nice. Cool. Yeah, we're glad to have you. And again, as I kind of mentioned earlier, we've had many quantum partners, but this is different. This will be interesting to me. My quantum knowledge has gone from here to here, and since this will be a different kind of episode, it'll go up to here, or hopefully up to here. Cool. So, would you like me to pull up your screen, Denis, for you?
That would be great.
All right, cool. And in chat, if anyone has any questions, comments, anything for our awesome partners, go ahead and pop them in there. We'll get to them, and we'll try and teach you and explain things.
Yeah, should I get started?
Yeah.
So throughout the slide deck, which will hopefully help educate you a little bit more about our space, we love to hear questions. So put them in chat. We can stop at any time and address those. There's a lot of deep tech here that we're going to cover. I hope you'll come away with some jargon that you'll see in other media, the pop science magazines and even regular reporting on it, and disclaimers that are often repeated and not useful for our industry. Really, this generation, this decade, we're hearing the most about two main pillars of technology. Of course, artificial intelligence just made a huge splash with ChatGPT, and of course, quantum computers. And quantum computers and the quantum industry is three different industries. It's really quantum sensing, quantum computing, and secure quantum communications, which is what Qrypt does. So we'll go into a little bit more detail about what that really means so that you can understand it going forward. It has major implications for all of our collective security. So my name is Denis Mandich, CTO, co-founder of Qrypt. Qrypt is also a co-founding member of the National Quantum Economic Development Consortium. This was funded by the U.S. federal government under the National Quantum Initiative to really organize all the quantum companies in the United States together so we can collaborate and really grow this emerging ecosystem. It's been very well organized in other countries, including just over the border in Canada, Europe, and elsewhere around the world. It's one of those industries that we really need to take off for the next generation of technologies in our economy. We're also co-founding members of a regional organization known as the Mid-Atlantic Quantum Alliance, which helps the local universities from Boston all the way down to Florida on the East Coast get students involved so that they can be prepared for the quantum workforce in the future. And just recently, we stood up the Center for Quantum Technologies, which was funded by the National Science Foundation, where I'm an advisory board member to help build that technology bridge between academia, industry, and government. I sit on multiple standards bodies. I'm a physicist by background, but I'm also a veteran of the U.S. intelligence community for 20 years.
Awesome. I love physics. Physics, I don't like math, but physics is great because it gave me an application of math that I actually was able to envision things with it. So I love that you're a fellow physicist. That's great.
Yeah, physics is, I don't want to start any fights with mathematicians, but, we always like, what came first, math or physics? And I think it's on the final slide. It's a great quote from Feynman, Richard Feynman, who kind of kicked off quantum computing and what it really means to be a quantum computer. And he said, if all of mathematics disappeared tomorrow, physics would be set back by exactly 1 week. So. Yeah. I'm not saying it. I'm just quoting what Feynman said. So we were really founded with the idea that we could secure our networks better. We've all watched cybersecurity fail decade after decade, our data getting stolen, our data being exploited. It's really unsustainable, the architecture that we've been using for the last few decades. We really have to continue to evolve. And unfortunately, the cybersecurity attackers are moving a little bit faster than the defenders. So it's a very hard problem. It's something that requires multiple different fields and expertise to really win this battle. And so we're partners with national labs, big companies that you see on the screen. And we really need everyone involved in this to secure the future against quantum computers. So Qrypt addresses three different pillars of quantum. We make quantum entropy sources, which generate huge amounts of quantum random numbers. These quantum random numbers are what Tiffany referred to earlier as the keys for securing our data. We need them to be truly random so that there's no predictability in them and they were never replicated, meaning somebody cannot guess the keys that we use. And there isn't a small number of keys. There's a very large number of keys that will all be spread out through everyone using them. So without that, we don't have any security in the algorithms that we use. So the key piece here is that is fundamental to the security of these systems. And then we need to get those keys to two different endpoints. We always call these people Alice and Bob that are communicating among themselves, and we'll talk a lot about them today. How do you get the keys from Alice to Bob and Bob to Alice so that they can secure the channel between them? And they must also know that they are Alice and Bob. And then the data channel, how do we use those keys that we have at the endpoints to actually encrypt the data, whether that's an HTTPS section, like in your browser, a secure messaging application like iMessage or WhatsApp, or something else like a secure file transfer. So those are the basic things that we need to secure our networks and to communicate freely among us. Just a little bit about cryptography, the basics that we're going to need for this discussion today. It's not enough to have the secrecy of the channel that if someone captured that data that they can't read it because it's scrambled in such a way by our algorithms that becomes unintelligible. We must have another property called authenticity. Authenticity means that Alice is absolutely sure that she is communicating with Bob and not somebody else that we call Eve in the middle. If there's a person like Eve in the middle and there's a secure channel between Alice and Eve and Bob, then Eve could modify and read all of our traffic and we wouldn't be any wiser. So we didn't really have any security if we didn't have authenticity. So it really is essential that we have the secrecy of the channel, remember those two things, and authenticity, that Alice is actually just talking to Bob and not to Eve. And then again, the very first step in all of these systems is the ability to just generate a truly random number. Random numbers, we only know of one way to actually do this in all of science, and that's to perform a quantum measurement. Quantum measurements are very different from other ways of producing random numbers. Everyone's familiar with rolling dice or flipping a coin. And it turns out that if we have very good knowledge about the way we flip that coin, or about the way we roll that dice, we can, with 100% accuracy, predict the outcome of all of those rolls or coin flips. That's not true in quantum mechanics. In quantum mechanics, when you flip a quantum coin, it's fundamentally unknowable, the outcome of the flip. You will not know if you get a 0 or 1, a heads or tails, or an on and off light switch. It's not because we're missing information about the system. It's just the way that the universe works. It's an unknowable outcome until we perform that measurement. And that's absolutely essential for getting this key part of our cryptographic stack together. So a little history: cryptography has been going on for thousands of years, many different versions that were considered secure at various times in history. Today, we're using a model where we're just going to use a little bit of jargon here. It uses something called public key infrastructure, where you have a public key, an encryption key that you tell everyone. Everyone in the world can use that key to encrypt data to you, but the only people that can decrypt that data is people with the private key. So that's public key infrastructure. It's also called asymmetric key distribution, which is something you're going to hear about more today. And then symmetric keys are just the same key. It's the old Captain Crunch decoder ring. You have the same key for encryption and the same key for decryption. Those are the two main types of cryptography that we're going to talk about. And then they have these other amazing properties, which are critical to understanding what's coming towards us in the quantum computing era. One is called information theoretically secure. That means that we can never invent any type of a computer or develop in mathematics or anything else that can ever break these types of systems. And then there's computationally secure. We don't know of any computers, whether they're quantum computers or classical computers, that will be able to break these systems. And that's the big difference that you're going to see in the media, which is quantum safe. We just don't know if it can be broken, but it's possible. There's no proof that it can't be. And then quantum secure. These are systems that the government used at great expense throughout the entire Cold War and are used for the most sensitive data that we have today. And of course, these are described as two suites of tools, Suite A and Suite B in the government. I won't spend a lot of time on that. The public encryption algorithms that we used, they were open to everyone in the world to analyze and try to break. And that's what the security is based on. No security through obscurity. Everyone gets to see how they work. And if anyone finds a flaw, that's great to know that now, because we would love to transition to something that's even stronger. And we'll see a really bad example of one that happened recently, and it's happened all the way back to the beginning of time. We always have to be coming up with new algorithms and new techniques to be able to secure our networks. The attackers are always trying to break them. I see James smiling. Did you have a question about that?
No, I just thought it was funny you mentioned security through obscurity, like kind of thing. Like if you make something that no one understands, eventually someone's going to try and understand it, and then that's when it kind of just falls apart.
Yeah, if you don't tell
like
everyone,
the jargon we're using, yeah,
it's the jargon. It's the other way to describe it is the golden rule is don't roll your own crypto. Put it out there for everyone to look at and kick the tires on. And if they can't poke holes in it, you're probably in pretty good shape. But if you're relying on the secrecy of how you did something, like a black box, that's a big no-no in this space. No one should trust that you did it right, because so many people have gotten it wrong. So this is very high level. What you see is the problem that we have today. This is the architecture that we inherited from the 1970s, when a single copper wire and a couple of switches connected two people. And that's not the world that we live in today. You know, Amazon has built this amazing cloud infrastructure. We have virtualized environments, containerized applications. All these things are not represented in the cryptography that we use, nor do they leverage it. So very high level at the top line, this is how the internet and almost all of our secure communications work. We have an asymmetric key exchange, a public and a private key pair. This is very costly for computers or even small devices like iPhones and so on to use. So it's not useful for encrypting data. It's useful for distributing those symmetric keys where you have the same key for encryption and decryption. And that's what's actually used to encrypt the data on most of the internet, whether it's browsers, again, or messaging or even video phone calls. Problem for us today is that quantum computers are scaling very quickly, and they're capable of breaking that top mechanism, that asymmetric piece between the public and private keys. And when they get that, then they get the symmetric keys inside, and they're able to decrypt all of our information. And that's a problem because the entire internet relies on just one or two of these algorithms. And that's what we've been using for over 30 years at this point. And we're coming into an era where we have to transition very quickly to meet this challenge of quantum computers being able to break this system. So this public key infrastructure has another feature to it that we've seen emerge just in the last decade. It's called end-to-end encryption, where there's no person in the middle that can ever see encryption in an encrypted data in an unencrypted state. It means that only Alice and Bob, the encryption happens at their endpoints. It doesn't matter where it goes in between because no one can ever decrypt it. This became a huge issue during COVID when these applications started advertising ways that they were doing business for us, where we trusted a certain level of privacy in these systems. And these happen in lots of different technologies, not just messaging and video phone calls, but the government came out and said, look, you know, there's a standard definition for all these things, and we have to do things in a very standardized way that gives everyone the assurances that they have some level of privacy, unless there's a commitment by the government for a subpoena or something else like that. But that's something that we have to deal with going forward because it's in almost everything that we use today. It's in ATM transactions. It's in all the health records that you access online. It's in the cloud infrastructure that communicates information back and forth between clouds and replicates them. It's also in subtle things that you might not recognize, but are very profoundly important going forward. It's in the machine learning and AI algorithms that we use. When we transition to autonomous systems, smart cities, smart cars, smart sensors, and the human is taken out of the equation in the decision-making process, anyone who can corrupt that data by decrypting the encrypted channel that goes between the two data points, the sensor and the command and control system, that's where we get into a lot of trouble. This was a famous case a little more than a decade ago called Stuxnet, where that's exactly what happened, where if you can interfere with the signaling mechanism that tells everyone, hey, the command center, this machine is operating beautifully, everything's fine, but in reality, the hackers are trying to destroy that machine by making it run completely out of control and haywire until it blows up. And so these aren't theoretical risks. These things have already happened. So we have to start thinking about all this data in transit and what it's really being used for, because it's not what we used for before, encrypting mail between gentlemen. It's a very different world that we live in, and the entire economy relies on these digital networks. So the issue for most of these systems is the persistence of these vulnerabilities. So if we install something in software or hardware, this lives on for a very long time. And sometimes those flaws in those systems are discovered many, many years before they're publicly revealed. So a lot of folks on this call have probably remembered Spectre and Heartbleed and Meltdown and all these other types of vulnerabilities that were discovered and exploited in some cases for years before a patch was discovered. And in most cases, if you're patching a system like this, especially on the hardware side, it degrades the performance of these systems. So in the last 5 or 6 years, the secure enclaves on the CPUs were designed to hold the keys to the kingdom, the cryptographic keys, away from the operating system itself. So if the operating system was ever infected by malware or hacked into, you would still have some layer of protection at the hardware inside of the CPUs. Unfortunately, this was exploited as well. And if that's exploited, then that really gives people, the hackers or the people on the exploitation chain access to everything on that system. Once you get the keys, the encryption keys to where the data is stored, or where that traffic for your bank accounts or anything else moves, they can transfer money to themselves if they wanted to. This is really important for what we're talking about today, because the algorithms that we're moving to were started in a competition in 2016. 80 something algorithms were promoted by various different research groups and companies as the next generation of encryption that we're going to use. We're only going to talk about one type of algorithm. These are the key encapsulation, the key exchange mechanism in that asymmetric piece. That was whittled down to just 2 algorithms just a year ago. And the hope was for diversity, that we would have at least 2 choices to implement in these future systems that were intended to be quantum safe. Well, just 7 years into the process, one of those finalists was broken by researchers with just a regular laptop computer. The problem here is that if that had been standardized next year, which is when we project that all post-quantum cryptography will become a unit standard, if that had been standardized next year and that flaw had not been discovered for 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, all the data that had been captured in that period of time encrypted with that channel would now be exploitable. And that didn't require a quantum computer. So the point here is that all this data doesn't necessarily require the brute force power of a big quantum computer. It's just as likely that a flaw will be found that we didn't think about when we designed these systems. We don't have a lot of experience with them, but we do know that we have to transition away from the ones that we've been using for the last 20 plus years. So we're going to move on to these unknowns because they're at least better than what we have today, but we don't really know if they might break in the future. And part of the NIST process is to ensure that anything that we transition to as a new algorithm does not become a permanent part of what we've done. So that's called crypto agility. Be prepared to hot swap these algorithms out at any point in the future if a flaw is discovered, if they need to be patched, or they need to be completely replaced.
So I was going to ask, when you're mentioning these new algorithms, how long does it take to those to be like kind of finalized, and how long does it take to update like across the board, like with NIST PQC and such?
Yeah, it's taken 8 years now. So we
Okay.
anticipate that these new algorithms, both on the signatures and the key exchange or key encapsulation, will be finalized as early as January 2024. We've been promised by NIST that it will happen in 2024. So the earliest is, just 3 or 4 months away at this point.
Okay,
The
cool.
process was brutal. This is involving, thousands of researchers around the world, teams, the 20 or 30 crypto mathematicians, trying to make sure they did everything right, looking for ways to break them. And that's exactly what we want. We want an open process. We want everyone to look at this and say, this is the best we can do. We fixed anything that came up as a flaw, and many of those came up over the years, and they were patched, they were made better, they increased key sizes, things like that.
Okay. And then someone wants me to ask, how long would it take the industry to get them from finalized to implemented and useful? Was that the January timeline, or was that something different?
Oh my, that's the $1 million question today for most of the industry. And we're going to get to that a little bit later. But the short answer is that the last time we transitioned to a new type of cryptography that started over 20 years ago, we're not even done with that. And remember, digital networks and the internet itself were tiny. They were minuscule compared to where they are today. And so we're in completely uncharted territory. We think it'll probably take 10 to 20 years to transition all of the infrastructure that we have. This isn't a light switch where you just upgrade to a new version of TLS. Many legacy systems, especially hardware, will not be functional with these much more computationally intensive algorithms. They need more resources to run. It just won't run on a 15-year-old laptop.
Yeah, and that's where the quantum computing stuff comes in, right?
Yeah. So quantum computers are a threat to all of those systems. So this is what people talk about most in the quantum communication side is that everyone realizes that the threat that we're dealing with is the fact that so much of our data has been collected already by bad actors, by nation states, and so on. We call that harvest now and decrypt later. It's a very effective technique of collecting data, waiting till somebody else discovers a flaw in it so that you can exploit that, decrypt it, and then operationalize it. But in this case, we know with absolute certainty that quantum computers of a sufficient scale can break that data just by brute force. We don't have to find the flaw. So it's a very big difference from why this was done historically. And this goes back to the earliest days of the Cold War. This is called the Venona program by the US intelligence community. They collected Soviet communications. They always found something was wrong in the software that they used, the way they generated random numbers and so on. And this actually led to many secret level prosecutions that no one really understood how they did it. And only in the 1990s was it revealed. Today, we see a very different world. I think some of you might have seen the movie The Imitation Game. It was about the Enigma cipher back during World War II and the code breaking that was done back then. So this is really early days of this going on, even in the Second World War and earlier. Now we're in a very uncharted territory because back in that day, you had to either tap like a copper cable or be somewhere near a microwave link or capture the radio signals in these broadcasts of encrypted communications to be able to do the harvesting piece. We live in a world where you can access any one of these data centers, networks from almost anywhere in the world. We have connected everything over the internet and made it accessible to harvesting from just about anywhere. So it's a very different situation where you had physical security and isolation of these systems decades ago. That's no longer the case now. That's really enabled this harvesting, and that's really what people talk about the most is all the good things that quantum computers do, develop new drugs for curing cancer, develop new vaccines and all those things, which is absolutely what they will do. But it seems like the dark side gets a lot of publicity, that they can break all of our security. Everyone's going to read all the email and bad things we sent in text message for the last 10 or 15 years. And it's going to just be bad for everyone. The other thing that people don't really think about so much is something the director of the NSA said about 10 years ago regarding the Harvest Now, Decrypt Later issue. He said that, look, this is the single largest transfer of wealth in human history from one country to another in the form of IP theft. And so this is an unsustainable situation. And we're really relying on just a small number of algorithms and tools that amount to a single point of failure. If any one of those pieces of the chain breaks, the whole security of the system breaks down. So we have to move on from that. So Harvest Now, Decrypt Later is something that's really in the past. It's an older technique that people did, again, going back to when tap was required near a radio station or something like that. The thing that's not captured in most media today is how this happens. No one's harvesting data at your house router or on your cell phone unless you're a big target, like the President of the United States, the Secretary of Defense. So that little bit of fear mongering is overblown in many cases. All data that's created every day is not of value to almost anyone. It's the value at those big collection points around the world where it can be filtered and prioritized. It's diplomatic and military traffic. It's state level secrets. It's intellectual property. All of those things are what's really important to attackers. They're going to, of course, collect a huge amount of privacy related data, including their interest in DNA. Now they're looking at the types of data that they want us to feed the next generation of AI models, which is something that we didn't really think about before. A lot of this data was not really valuable. It wasn't very easy to monetize. But what ChatGPT has told us is that, look, it's hugely valuable now because the people that are sitting on piles of data can train the next generation of AI models. The people that don't have data have no chance of training anything. They have to rely on open source and scraping the internet. So the takeaway from this is that don't be so worried about the Harvest Now, Decrypt Later issue for small scale things, again, like your home computer, if you're not doing anything that's of interest to a nation state or somebody that would bother storing the data. But just think about it this way. The price of storing data 10 years ago or 15 years ago was high. It's almost reduced down to nothing. So it's very profitable to sit on that data, even if you don't know if it's useful. Wait for the day that quantum will just come online and just go ahead and decrypt it. So people always want an example like, is this real? Is this something that goes on? Well, yeah, this goes on all the time. It's just not as sexy as someone hacking your password. So most recently, just a few months ago, we can look to recent history for examples of why this was of profound importance. So Tetra is a standard for encryption in Europe. It's used for radio communications with police, military, intelligence, first responders, critical infrastructure, all those systems. So they have a standards body there called ETSI, which is their equivalent of NIST, which is the standards body in the U.S. They, in the 1990s, deployed a system, which this is all public information now, that appears to have been backdoored, meaning they weakened the cryptography inside that system and sold it all around the world. So the maps at the bottom of the page tell you roughly where these networks are operating today. And they're by lots of different vendors. Again, they're not just radios for walkie-talkie communications. They're for sensor systems to make sure, the operating parameters at a giant electrical plant are staying within the normal safe bounds. So here, all of those communications are also used to guard nuclear weapons facilities. They're used to guard the facilities that would be targeted by terrorists. And so this was only revealed, this vulnerability, this weakness, in it just a few months ago. This had been deployed for 25 years. It's not an easy thing to just patch and replace all the hardware on these systems. And so the harvesting of that data has gone on for years. Now everyone knows how to break it. But it's not just the breaking of the data, being able to read the traffic, understand what our enemies are, in many cases, our allies are doing. It's the other things that introduced into the equation. It's de-anonymizing the users, figuring out who is Alice and who's Bob on this network, and are they the targets that I really need to pull off some operation. It's about tracking people within the network as well for other reasons, including terrorist attacks. The problem when you weaken cryptography or introduce backdoors, even for law enforcement and other applications, is that eventually people figure out what it was. And these things are what I was talking about earlier, persistent. They're not easy to fix. They're not quick replacements. And they live on for many years, even after they're publicly disclosed on many networks. So we can't tolerate this level of weakness in systems, and we have to do something about it for quantum right now. The way to think about this or frame this is we hear a lot about Q-Day or Y2Q, which is an analogy with what we saw a couple decades ago with Y2K. But now it's a very different situation, because if we need our data to stay safe for X number of years, it's going to take us Y number of years to reach that quantum safe state. If that collective timeline is longer than the amount of time it takes our adversaries to build a quantum computer that can break it, we have a today problem. If you think about data, we talk about data theft all the time. Well, you still have your data. There's just a copy of it on a server in an adversarial country, right? So you don't know what's out there sitting on those servers waiting to be decrypted. And you can bet that there's a lot of it out there that's of very high interest to our adversaries. And we can't do anything about that to go back and fix it. It's already gone. That copy exists over there. But here, we're looking at data going forward, everything that we're creating today and the networks that we're building for the next 5 or 10 years. And the NIST algorithms are really what's going to get us into that quantum safe state. And if they fail, we'll move on to something else. So we're always going to think about this as the next step in our journey into becoming more and more quantum safe, more and more cryptographically secure. So this equation, I deleted the actual algebra in it, but it's called Mosca's equation. If you ever want to Google it, I understand people don't like to see equations on the screen, so I just tried to make it as a timeline.
How do you spell that? M-O-S?
Mosca, M-O-S-C-O.
Okay.
C-A, sorry. Mosca's equation. Maybe Leon could put it in the chat. Now we're getting kind of to the heart of what makes cryptography quantum. This is a very open question because it's become confused over the years. We thought we knew what it meant a few years ago, but there's a couple of essential pieces that all quantum secure or quantum safe or anything that could be called quantum cryptography does. So we're going to graphically look at something called QKD, which is quantum key distribution, where you must have some quantum entropy source. A quantum entropy source is, again, something on which I can perform measurements and extract completely unknowable random numbers from it. And that's absolutely perfect for generating keys for cryptography. We have to have that. So here, QKD will briefly explain how it works. You have Alice and Bob, the sender and the receiver. At Alice's end, she has something called a QRNG, a quantum random number generator, which is a quantum entropy source that just does one thing. It makes random quantum measurements. She sends those qubits, we'll call them, over to Bob. Bob does the same thing on his side. He uses his QRNG, or quantum random number generator, to perform random measurements on that qubit. And then Alice and Bob now have two giant pools of quantum random numbers at their endpoints, but they don't match. So now they use a classical channel to say, I perform these measurements, Bob. Alice, I perform these measurements. And whenever those measurements match, we can use all those bits that are left over as key material for cryptography. That's in essence what quantum cryptography does. And there's different variants of it. We also have another variant where if I take that quantum random number generator, I just make a huge amount of quantum random numbers from it, and I physically, with SneakerNet, hand deliver it over to Bob, and I say, sayonara, Bob, I'll see you next week. But now I can use those quantum keys that were generated at the endpoints to communicate between us absolutely securely. But that requires a physical mechanism of actually taking the quantum entropy from one place and delivering it to another. Quantum key distribution is another way of doing that with a channel that's a dedicated piece of fiber, meaning that's an unbroken piece of fiber. There are no quantum repeaters. There's nothing else on there, and they exchange data between Alice and Bob. So the classical channel is what NSA objects to, is that, look, if I need a classical channel to do any part of this communication, it's not really secured by the laws of physics. You're still using classical cryptography, and we absolutely have to do that to, again, go back to what we discussed earlier today, which is authenticity. Alice and Bob have to be sure that that is who they're communicating with, and there's no quantum way of doing that other than meeting in person and exchanging quantum keys. So when we look at the things that are going to get certified as new standards from the US government, quantum key distribution will not be one of them. NSA has repeatedly said that. And so we won't be using that except on some niche applications. The electrical grid is one that we hear about a lot, but the federal government will not allow that to be used for secure communications, which means that almost no one will use it. So the must-haves that we have here, we've got to have a way to generate quantum random numbers, to generate those quantum states, those random qubits from Alice to Bob. Here, the other piece that we really want from a quantum communications network that's actually viable for the internet or for government even, is we must have decentralization and redundancy. Here, a quantum key distribution network, it can be interfered with by a pair of scissors. If we cut that piece of fiber, that link goes down indefinitely. If we interfere with the endpoint, that link goes down indefinitely. Even if everything works out perfectly in that network, we need to get those keys to someplace else where they can be used, like a cell phone or a laptop. And again, these endpoints exist outside of all of your other cybersecurity infrastructure. They're two physical appliances that are connected by a single piece of unbroken fiber. And the limit for that distance-wise is about 50 kilometers. Yes, the Chinese have just shown that you can do that over 1,000 kilometers, but your key rate goes down exponentially the farther you go. So it'll take them an entire day to transmit a single key that they can use for encryption. That's not really useful for commerce. That's not going to help the internet. So we're going to look at some more ways of getting around it. But we can get a little bit of inspiration from history. So this is something that went on very effectively throughout the entire Cold War. And if you have a ham radio or some of these internet radio stations, you can still go out and listen to these channels. So during the 1950s through the 2000s, some areas were called denied areas by the US government. This was the Soviet Union, North Korea, Cuba, Iran, and so on. They had no way of getting key material into those locations. So what they did was broadcast random numbers into those countries. And then an asset or an agent in one of those countries on a Monday afternoon would be his time slot. He would write down the first 100 digits that he heard over just a regular open radio channel that everyone can listen to. Then that person's time slot was another hour Thursday morning at 7 a.m., whatever it might be, and so on. He would collect a whole bunch of numbers over, let's say, a week or two, and then it's called an XOR operation. You would combine those numbers in a way that was, reducing a large amount of numbers down to small numbers that you can actually use for a key. And then you could encrypt any data that you wanted with that key and send it in a regular letter, where anyone who intercepted that letter would have no way of knowing what the key was because it was not related to the letter itself, and they would not be able to decrypt it. So that was very effectively used until very recently. And we don't know why, but we still hear these radio stations broadcasting worldwide on many different channels. And there's an entire community that's dedicated to figuring out who they're communicating with and why. So in embassies around the world, if you think about an embassy, say in Moscow, you can assume that Russia owns all of the communications infrastructure outside of the embassy that you have to communicate with the outside world. And so that's not really a practical solution for something like that. So we use those types of networks to hand carry symmetric key material with a diplomatic courier from Washington, D.C. to our embassy in Moscow. And now we can also communicate securely over any data going over a Russian controlled fiber. So those are multiple ways of doing it, but there has to be a better way that the rest of the internet can do. All of that we described was all about getting keys to an endpoint, distributing keys. So distributing keys really means that I can use public key infrastructure today, like we use for the internet. It's the diplomatic courier bringing it someplace else, the symmetric keys from one place to another, or something like those radio stations that we described a little bit earlier. And what we really want is to eliminate what we talked about at the beginning of this call, which is harvest now and decrypt later. We don't want to send keys or distribute keys like we've been doing with this public key infrastructure anymore, because that gets to the heart of the harvest now and decrypt later issue. We have now distributed keys, those symmetric keys for encryption, along with the data that we're sending, for example, in a browser session, making it very easy for harvest now and decrypt later to happen. So first things first, we need to separate the mechanism that we get keys to Alice and Bob, and we need to decouple that from the data so that the data and the key material used to encrypt it are two separate things. They're not bundled together anymore. The internet
And Denis,
yeah.
Is there any way you could help me understand, like, what does that look like for maybe like a larger scale business? We use this example of Alice and Bob, but for different businesses that are that have been doing this sort of thing for a while, what do implications look like, and how would they really get to the point where they could get to this point where you don't distribute keys like this?
Yeah, so in this next generation of post-quantum cryptography, we're still going to be distributing keys. That's part of the problem. And so you'll see what Qrypt is doing to eliminate that issue altogether. So as we transition, NIST already advised us, look, be crypto agile. The mechanism by which we're distributing keys could break again. And if history is our guide, it will happen. We don't know when. It might be 5 years. It might be 100 years. We just don't know. So here we're suggesting, Qrypt is suggesting, that we need to graduate to a different type of architecture. Get rid of this key distribution mechanism and replace it with key generation at the endpoint. So if you go back to the radio station, they didn't distribute keys with the radio channel. All it did was broadcast random numbers all over the world, and the keys were generated at the endpoint by an agent.
Oh, okay.
Same thing with QKD. We have a QKD sender, sent a whole bunch of quantum random numbers from one user to another. Then they used that classical channel to get that key agreement at the endpoint. They threw away all the ones that didn't match. They kept the ones that matched together, and they used that for that symmetric key material. So now we'll see a little bit of how to get around this issue and how to move beyond this kind of 1970s architecture. I said earlier that this was really designed for a world where there was only one channel. There was a copper wire that spread across the Atlantic and some switches in between that connected Alice and Bob. But that's still what we're doing with the internet today. That's remarkable that we haven't really changed that public key infrastructure, the architecture of it, in 40 years. So what you see at the bottom left here is that exact description that I've given throughout. And on the right is what Qrypt does. This is how you go on beyond key distribution and replace it with key generation. So just like those QKD endpoints generated quantum entropy with those quantum random number generators, Qrypt has lots of those in the cloud. It's distributed in different data centers at low latency access points, and they're made available through simple API calls. So it's like the old people in the Cold War listening to a radio station. Well, we don't have these radio stations anymore. They're just API calls to a random number generator in the cloud. And now this is where a bit of the magic comes in and the change in the architecture. The PQC session, that public key, the next quantum version of the public key infrastructure that we use to distribute keys, we won't use that to distribute keys anymore. We're going to do something very different with it. We're going to exchange a small amount of metadata in a secure way. It's still quantum safe. That metadata has two pieces to it. It tells us which one of Qrypt's cloud servers they can access because they're authenticated users. This is a paid service. And they download specific strings from each one of those endpoints, just like in the QKD model. Now, Alice and Bob, in that first step, have assembled huge amounts of quantum random numbers at their endpoint, but they're missing one more piece. And that second piece in that metadata exchange is the parameters for something called a cryptographic extractor. A cryptographic extractor takes a huge amount of random numbers and effectively distills them down into a symmetric key that you can use to do data encryption. So we've eliminated the step where you're distributing keys using that PQC method and replaced it with a small amount, a recipe you can think of for assembling keys at the endpoint with some metadata. Next slide will give you a little bit of a better flavor of how that happens. If you can imagine, well, just think of it as sample and extract. So at the very top, the long blue bar would be a bunch of random strings on a single server in one of our cloud data centers. Alice and Bob will now start that PQC exchange just like they would have to distribute keys. But again, it's just metadata that they're exchanging. Alice and Bob will now pick out those strings from those cloud servers that they will download to their endpoint, those green boxes at the top. Someone's colorblind, this might be a little hard to see. But of the green and blue boxes, they'll only pick the green boxes. They will download those to their endpoints. They will assemble them into one long row of random numbers called concatenation. And then the final piece is unique to their session. It's unknown to the cloud. It's applying extractors that only they knew between them because of that PQC session that they started. And that distills that huge amount of random numbers down into a single key in a way that's unknowable to the cloud. So you can think of the cloud as possibly being nefarious, meaning us, Qrypt, supplying the entropy as a service, that we somehow recorded all those green boxes and know exactly which ones you downloaded. We don't keep track of it because we don't want to know. And then we're still missing the parameters for that last step on how you assembled that into a key. So now we have true end-to-end encryption. Only Alice and Bob had all the materials that they ever needed to assemble the key at their endpoint, and they can use that for secure data transmission between them, where now they no longer have to rely on the security of the medium. They don't have to trust the ISP or the service provider or their applications vendor that's using it. And here we're also implicitly crypto agile because we don't really care which algorithms are used. Even the classical algorithms that we're using today, we're not relying on the security of that single point of failure, the algorithm, the key generation mechanism. We've distributed it over multiple different clouds, over multiple different access points, and also assembling the keys at the endpoint rather than distributing them. So that's the really big takeaway. We've added a different layer of public key infrastructure on top of the one that we've been using for all these years, and also made it available to these new algorithms for post-quantum cryptography. So that's what really brings that layer of security that takes away the harvest now and decrypt later issue. We assume that some of these channels will be collected on a data center that's been compromised by bad actors, by hackers, but it doesn't matter. It's an all or nothing proposition. If you missed any one bit from any one of these exchanges, you get nothing in the end. You can never create the same key material ever again.
Hey, Dennis.
Yeah.
We got a couple comments in the chat. So the question was kind of, people are still constantly trying to decrypt messages, and the tech is so advanced that you are going to eventually get there. And then what we're trying to say was the evolutionary race is to keep ahead of that. But then you also mentioned part of the intrinsic nature of it is that because it's truly 100% random, will that be a way of getting ahead of it? Is that what we're kind of trying to get to?
Yeah. And if there's lots of recent cases of where people can just guess your keys, right? With quantum random, there's no way to predict the outcome. It's absolutely unpredictable. That's based on the laws of physics. It has nothing to do with computers that we use.
Okay, yeah.
So we absolutely need that at the foundational layer. And I'd love to give this example because, everyone loves cryptocurrency now. It's an amazing thing. But if that private key for your cryptocurrency wallet is not really random, selected from a quantum source, then somebody can guess it. And if someone can guess your private key in cryptocurrency, they can transfer all that cryptocurrency to themselves. It's an immutable transaction on the blockchain. They are you. There's no takebacks. And so there's a guy called the Ethereum Bandit who guessed that instead of your 1,000 or 10,000 bit key, it wasn't some huge random number. It was the number one. It was the number two. That's how bad the random number generator was for these wallets. And he went ahead and guessed, like, oh, well, if it's number one, let's see if there's any cryptocurrency in that wallet. If there is, I'll transfer all to myself. Well, anyway, make a long story short, he went out and got away with about $25 million in Ethereum before they realized, oh my God, we've got a problem generating keys for our wallets, and that's how he did it. And so now there's people out there speculating that since the price of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies has dropped so much, that instead of mining new Bitcoins, you can use that same infrastructure to just guess keys. And yeah, there's websites dedicated to this. I'm not advocating for this, of course, and you can use the power on your laptop to just guess keys as many times as you want to hit the enter button, and the website automatically checks all the different cryptocurrency wallets for any cryptocurrency that you can transfer yourself. And so this is the same thing that happens with data, but you don't hear about it as much because there's no value in it. So if somebody decrypts the cat videos that you sent to your mom, who cares? It only makes the news when someone got away with something that's valuable.
I feel personally attacked. You just guessed all my ATM pin numbers 1 and 2. I have to go change them now.
The randomness problem goes back to the earliest days of the Cold War. So if you want to do brute force decryption, you want to do massive collection, you don't try to break the algorithms. You just make their keys very predictable. And these are very sensitive techniques for intelligence agencies. And just another one recently. I go on for hours about these, but they're getting more creative. And so the Russians came up with one. It's called reductor malware. I mean, you can Google this. And all it did, very clever, was, so in every one of our browsers, there's something called a pseudo random number generator. So it makes session keys, and they corrupted the way those session keys were made for browsers that were using the Cyrillic language and the near abroad for them. And so they didn't have to hack into anybody. They just corrupted the way you made your keys, and they could see all of your internet traffic in the clear. And they were very clever in the sense that if they had done that on English language websites or English language browsers, Symantec or something like that would have discovered it pretty quickly. But they didn't.
I see what you're saying.
No one was looking. It was very specifically done, targeting Cyrillic language websites and users of those networks. And again, that's the way you do very fast bulk decryption. It doesn't require supercomputers. It requires a laptop. And so these were seeded for decades. If you have a chance, Google Crypto AG. It's a super cool article about how that was done for 40 years in the Cold War for diplomatic communications. Again, just compromise the way we make the random numbers, then your keys aren't random. I just guess keys then. I don't need any sophisticated electronics or equipment to do that. It's very fast and easy and super effective. Of course, you don't even need to do that with quantum computers. You can just do it by brute force because it's a calculation. It's not a guess. You're absolutely sure that you got the right answer at the end.
Cool. Let me just jump in real quick. If you're just joining us right now, welcome to our show, Howdy Partner at AWS. We are joined today by our friends and partners from Qrypt. They're explaining how quantum cryptography is working to get ahead of the game, get ahead of the attacks, and make it so our cryptographies cannot be broken. Our data is secure, even if we're trying to combat that harvest now, decrypt later kind of problem, and just we get ahead of it. Because what's the saying? Like people say in security, you can't say, oh, this will never fail. It's when it fails or when it breaks. So you always just got to keep moving past that. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat, any comments. We'll try to get to them. And of course, it wouldn't be an AWS show without our famous surveys. I dropped the survey link in the chat. Please take 30 seconds. I know it's in the middle of the show, but want to give us time to fill those out. Take 10 seconds and fill that out. It's real quick. Appreciate that. and turn it back over to the experts over here. Sorry
Yeah.
about that.
No, that's great. And, it's a good point halfway through the show to remind everyone, what is quantum cryptography? I have to have a way to make quantum keys. I need a quantum entropy source and a quantum number generator. I need to make those keys someplace, and I got to get them somewhere else without anyone being able to intercept them. That's in a nutshell what we can think of as quantum cryptography. So again, ways like QKD to do it, and what I just described here that Qrypt does, which effectively inverts the way QKD does it. They had quantum entropy sources at the endpoints and dedicated piece of fiber. We put all that in the cloud and made it available to any endpoint with very simple API calls and an SDK that you can use for any application. So that's where all of this is going. We're moving on from everything we've done for decades to something more advanced where we will no longer tolerate a single point of failure like an algorithm, like a random number generator or something like that.
And it looks like
Yeah, go ahead, Tiff. I think you're going to say what I was going to say.
Yep, I was going to say we do have a question in the comments, and they're asking, is there also some harm in having a truly uncrackable encryption? Because then people could use that for reasons that aren't for good.
Yeah, that's a very valid argument. But the bad actors, the terrorists, and so on, they use computers too. They use pencils and paper, and there's nothing we can do about that. And if someone is a really bad actor, someone is about to blow something up or whatever, and the authorities really they'll get to their endpoint. So encryption's not going to help them very much. Yeah, sure, in the short haul, yes, it's going to hurt law enforcement and catching criminals, but in the long haul, the damage to our economy and to privacy is so great for so many years that that's not sustainable. We need very strong encryption to have privacy guarantees going forward. We don't know where all this goes. Our genetic data, how and our private communications will be used in the future. We've always had that throughout history. We could always go in our house and have a private communication with our friends and family. There's no reason for any government to have access to a microphone in our house either. So I will say that, having been in the intelligence community for decades, there was nobody that wanted that. Nobody wanted to have weak encryption or poor privacy so that we could read everybody's mail. The only people that want that, of course, are law enforcement, because it makes their job that much harder. If they can't tap your phone and listen to your phone calls and know that you're up to no good, that makes it harder for them. But that goat has left the barn.
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying. So what they're doing or communicating to each other is like unbreakable, but from the outside, they're gonna get found through. I could be doing something in my living room, and they won't know that I'm doing it in my living room, but just based on what other things are happening around them, they're gonna find me somehow, kind of thing.
Yeah, and the way to think about that is the entire world is covered by something called the social graph. It's how every human on Earth is connected to everyone else, and there's also a machine graph. Every device is connected to everyone else on Earth, and it's in short order. Somebody will figure out that you're connected to a terrorist network or something like that, and even if they don't know what you're doing, they're pretty sure that you're going to get arrested or you're going to have to be taken offline.
Yeah, got it.
So, and think about this as well, is that there's lots of app developers and so on overseas that don't care about laws in the U.S. Telegram, as an example, that will never abide by any backdoors or limitations on cryptography, and nor should they. It's not required. Certainly, again, as I mentioned, if you're a very high target for a really bad act, they're going to get to you and your device some other way. It's not going to have to happen through decryption. So, go ahead.
Dennis, sorry, one more question that was in the chat. Someone did also ask, how are the sessions secure between the different users in this scenario that you've been speaking about?
The sessions, you meaning the API calls to the cloud?
It looks like it, yes.
Yeah, you can just use any variant of TLS or any algorithm that you're already using, because the security does not rely on any one of those being secure, because there's another piece of information, again, that PQC exchange between Alice and Bob, that even if you collected all of that, it still doesn't help you.
Got it.
Got it.
And we're going to
Thanks.
see in the next example what that looks like in practice. So Mattermost is a simple application. It's free, open source. Lots of folks in finance and government use this as a replacement for Teams or WhatsApp or something else. Where now we want to use that service, but we want to have a different level of privacy and security guarantees that we can't get from trusting the service on the back end. So as I mentioned before, we discovered during COVID, when everyone's working remotely, that look, these applications aren't really end-to-end encrypted. There's a whole hole in the middle where we are trusting the server to not be an Eve, to not be able to see our encrypted traffic in an unencrypted state. Well, using the Qrypt service, now you will use all the same applications, but they're no longer involved in the key mechanism. The way that you make keys at the endpoints or exchange them across their network, they're not involved in that process anymore. They're the data in transit layer. They're the front end that you see to encrypt traffic and to move it around among authenticated users, but they're not involved in the security aspect of it beyond making sure you have access to their cloud. So here, Alice and Bob are on their laptops at home. They would love to start a chat. They will first initiate the session on Mattermost. Hey, look, Alice and Bob, we'd love to start communicating. And now, after they've established that they would like to start their chat, they will go out to the Qrypt entropy as a service. They will agree on which one of those servers that they see in the cloud through that separate channel, that separate PQC exchange. They will download lots of quantum random to their endpoint, and then the parameters for extracting from that quantum random a whole bunch of keys. And here the beauty is that you can operate in one of two modes. You can use simple AES keys to do the encryption, the way we do for most of our TLS or browser sessions, and that gets you to a quantum safe state. We believe that AES 256 is quantum state. Or you can go up to the most extreme version that the government uses for its most sensitive networks, which is one-time pad encryption, which is absolutely quantum secure. Now, it no longer matters if anyone ever harvested that data. They can never decrypt it. So one-time pads are quantum secure. AES encryption is quantum safe. And you can do both of those mechanisms with this type of channel used in the Qrypt infrastructure. And again, you no longer have to trust the Mattermost messaging service, whether you're running it online yourself. It doesn't matter. It's not part of the equation for getting the keys to the endpoint. That key distribution mechanism goes away, and you replace it with key generation at the endpoints. And again, that can be done with any application that's moving data around. It could be mail, it could be video calls. It really doesn't matter. So we're going to turn it over to Greg for a live demonstration on what this looks like across lots of clouds, including Amazon's, which we use every day.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Hey,
thanks,
Greg.
Denis. Yep.
Yeah. How you been doing the last hour?
Very good. Very good. Always learn something new when Denis talks. So that's always good.
I'm going to stop sharing now.
Okay. Yeah, I'll pop it up. Just real quick. I've heard that we're going to talk about Kyber and dilithium. I'm a sci-fi nerd, something like that. Star Trek and Star Wars. Is this true? Please cross my fingers.
Of course it is. We're all nerds, right? Star Wars, Star Trek, dilithium crystals from the original Enterprise.
Yeah. Awesome.
Take it away. Right.
Sounds good. Am I sharing now?
Yeah, I got you up there. I got you up there.
All right, great. So what I'm going to show is a real simple demo. So we've integrated the Qrypt tech into the Envoy proxy. It's very prevalent cloud native proxy. And I've got a Blender bot set up. Blender bot's a chat bot using the Hugging Face library. And I've got a Docker instance running on my laptop in New York City. I'm running the Envoy proxy as well as a client-side chatbot service. You can see that right here, 127.0.0.1. And then I've also got a Kubernetes cluster in Melbourne, Australia. So a 10,000 plus mile quantum secure channel. I'm using the one-time pad cipher that Denis referenced, and it's unique to me. And when I first found this out, I was kind of amazed. So one-time pad offers information theoretic security, which is unbreakable encryption. It's also quantum secure, and that's exactly what this demo does. So I've got the chatbot here locally in New York City. I'm going to send a message to the chatbot server. You'll see that the response come up. And if I go here to the Kubernetes logs in Melbourne, Australia, you'll see that process that takes place with regards to the assembly of the entry pool from the 10 Qrypt servers. The message was, what is quantum mechanics? That's the plain text. Then the pools of entry are aggregated. Then the key is extracted. In this case, the key is a one-time pad. As that one-time pad's created, a metadata file is created with the parameter variables for that one-time pad, like the fact that we're using a one-time pad cipher, where were the pools of random pulled from, and then that metadata file is shared with the server. The server then uses that to decrypt my message, what is quantum mechanics. Then the response message from the chatbot server in Melbourne, Australia, same process happens. It responds with theory basically describes particles in the universe, etc. You see the entry pools from the 10 Qrypt servers get downloaded. The one-time pad is once again extracted. Once again, that's unbreakable quantum secure encryption, and the response is sent back to the megabyte chat server. So really, what Qrypt does with the unique keygen technology is operationalize information theoretic security and one-time pad usage. So that's very unique, because the primary issue with one-time pad in the past has been the cipher is as large as the data payload. It makes that difficult to operationalize one-time pads. But because we only locally generate the one-time pad key on the endpoint itself, we can operationalize that and make that a reality and deliver a quantum secure solution today. And this just kind of walks through that process again. Once again, the access to the quantum random numbers from the quantum random number generators, API calls are done. Those are downloaded over an MTLS session. Then the SDK or the proxy will generate a quantum symmetric key. That key recipe is shared with from the sender to the receiver. The receiver gets that, decrypts the message. Then that same process takes place. You saw that in the Kubernetes logs, where they access, once again, the same pools of random from the cloud. Those are downloaded, aggregated, and then the local key is extracted, identical symmetric one-time pad. And then voila, you got quantum secure communications from New York City to Melbourne, Australia. That's it in a nutshell. And, we really focus on extensibility. So the SDK currently is C++ and WebAssembly. We're also looking at Rust. We have wrappers for multiple other languages. We have an elaborate GitHub repo, which I think we'll cover shortly. But it's really, we strive to simplify technical validation. And once again, no security via obscurity. So we want people to test the tech. We want people to go to GitHub. You can download that containerized proxy with the Qrypt tech integrated and test that on your own. And we offer a free account for quantum entropy also. So that's it. Real quick and simple, but still effective demonstration.
Thanks, Greg. So you got to see a little bit of the nuts and bolts of how this happens in practice. And the beauty is that anyone can go to our website and start using these tools in our GitHub repo. Can I start sharing my screen again?
Yeah, I'll pull that up. Looks good. There we go.
I might be on the wrong page. Go next page. Yeah, so here, if you think about the steps that are required to simply do exactly what Greg described, is we start with the foundational piece that's at the heart of all cryptography. All of our security proofs and all the algorithms that we use assume that you have some level of entropy or intrinsic randomness in the way that you make keys. And we only know of one way in science to do that, and that's, again, through quantum entropy, performing quantum measurements, and then extracting single zeros or ones, on-off switches from that, stringing them together, and we can make huge amounts of quantum random numbers. Qrypt has done this very openly with U.S. national labs, Oak Ridge National Lab, and Los Alamos National Lab, to make sure all the physics is right, and that we can have proof that we can share with anyone in the community about how we did it. Even at this layer, since it's so critical and it's been so horribly exploited over the last half century, we have to get that right. And that's why we built the entropy service to start with. And again, anyone can use that for their own unique crypto packages that they might be using that don't use the Qrypt SDK. Then the digital quantum key distribution. We talked about it a little bit earlier. The QKD model of having that single piece of fiber with those single physics appliances at the endpoint that sit outside of all your other cybersecurity tools and everything else in a data center. We've replaced that and inverted it by putting it in the cloud. and making it available to any endpoint. Again, laptops, cell phones, what have you, it doesn't matter to us. And then at the final stage is actually using that key generation at the endpoint to any two endpoints in the world, requiring no special infrastructure to be able to get a secure communications channel, the equivalent of a VPN. So the migration process is pretty straightforward. You start with the premise that you need to stop distributing keys and replace them with key generation at the endpoint. You can use all the same logic, the same algorithms. Everyone knows how to incorporate APIs into their applications. Everyone at some point has embedded the Google Maps API into their app so that anyone can find their headquarters. It's not that different from that. It's just a little bit esoteric in the sense that we're using very sophisticated quantum hardware at the other end of this food chain. You don't need to know how that works. You can go read all the papers if you're a physicist. You can read all the crypto mathematics that we've done on the algorithm side as well. But we've opened it up to scrutiny. Anything that was ever an issue with it, we've upgraded and made sure that we've done everything right. We've also taken the most extreme view on all of this. We take the most conservative parameters on everything that we do, whether that's key length or the amount of entropy that we actually have in our appliances and so on. We love the X-Files. We're not just Star Trek and Star Wars fans. We're, sci-fi. And, the mantra back then is trust no one. You don't have to trust Qrypt. Look at what we've done. It's all in the public domain. Look at how we generate those keys at the endpoint, and you will realize very quickly that we're not part of that process. Even if the gun pointed to our head, someone said, recreate the keys for those end users, we just can't do it. And so that's important for privacy going forward because it's been really exploited for decades now. And there's some famous books written about surveillance capitalism. We need to transition away from that. It's not just privacy, it's national economic security. That's the way theft of IP is done. That's the way private data is exploited. We need to move away from that and make a more secure internet than the one that we've inherited from the last generation. The other point, again, is there should never be key escrow. This comes around periodically back, from the 1990s, where the government wanted everyone to share a copy of their encryption keys, which they would only ever use if, by subpoena or court order and so on. Those things never work. You put a backdoor in something, really smart cybersecurity researchers are going to find it. I gave you a recent example of Tetra. You can just go Google. Hundreds of these have happened over the years. We can't tolerate that in the future. James,
what? That was a thing? Like the government wanted that?
Yeah,
really?
You lived through those years.
I never heard of this.
It was called the Clipper chip and the key escrow, where everyone had to, if you wanted to encrypt any kind of data on the internet in the 90s when it first kicked off, or even for bank transactions and things like that, you would put that key in a black box that you would send to the government, and the government would not open that black box except under court order. It's coming around again because post-quantum cryptography needs to be more secure. We're moving on to new algorithms. Again, one-time pad encryption is quantum secure for all of eternity. It can never be broken. Oh, somebody put the Clipper chip in the chat. Yeah, it's law enforcement. Their job just got so much harder with the advent of encryption starting in the early 1990s. Of course, we know how this has been exploited, but it's not really going to save you if you're a bad actor. They're going to figure out who you are, who you're connected to, and what you've been up to.
Mess that up a little bit here.
Let
me drop that in the chat again.
The chat, yeah. So you asked where do we stand in this process today? Well, we're coming up to the end. It started back in 2015, 2016. You could argue that it actually started back in 2010. Quantum computers really became a technology that was hitting the market in those years, and everyone's hair started to get on fire a little bit. Now it's ablaze because there's many companies trying to build quantum computers. It's not just one or two. It's really an arms race, right? The people that have quantum computers will absolutely dominate their industry. No one can compete with them. If you have a quantum computer in pharmaceutical design and you don't actually have to go out and test thousands of different variants of a recipe on people, you can just do it with a quantum computer. You win every new drug discovery process. It's the same thing for energy systems, advanced battery design, and so on. So quantum computers will be built. That's where the money is. AI is another pillar of this new industry that we're entering into now, and that's what precipitated this process. And we're in the final stage now. If we haven't discussed digital signatures, they're on the top right. It's a little bit beyond the scope of today's call, but we're certainly willing to answer questions about it. Top left is what we've been talking about. It's key encapsulation or key exchange, that method of getting those symmetric keys to the endpoints. Until last year, there were two ways to do that. So if one broke, we could quickly, in that crypto agile model, switch to the other one. Well, Psych or super singular isogenies was broken by a regular laptop computer. We don't know if that could happen to Qrypt. We have no proof that it can't. And we should assume that it could and be prepared to do something else. We cannot rely on this model, again, from the 1970s of a single point of failure, whether it's an algorithm or anything else. We have to move on to the world that we live in today. And so we're anticipating this being announced as early as January, a few months from now. And that process that, probably realistically 15 to 20-year process of transitioning to these new algorithms will start then. But anyone who's doing it today, and Qrypt is the one that will be standardized, will look at their high value data. What's really important to me? Where's my intellectual property? Where's my customer data? Where do we store credit cards, healthcare records, the most sensitive government communications for the White House or the military, and so on. Those are the things that we really need to focus on first, because we can't fix everything all at once. This is not a light switch that suddenly everything works and it's all quantum secure. That's not going to happen. So if we look at the analogy back to multi-factor authentication and the trajectory of that, and where we keep evolving that model, we anticipate the same thing will happen with cryptography. And again, we'll incorporate new tools, new technology, new algorithms, new architectures, primarily the way Qrypt is doing it, and not just do a little bit better version of what we've been doing since, again, the 1970s. So the other, the top two ciphers here, Qrypt and dilithium, were primarily led by IBM teams and outside academics. And then of the 80-something other ones that were submitted, almost all of them have failed either on security parameters, being outright broken by regular computers, or their performance was too poor. There were some excellent algorithms out there. One of the ones in the reserve on the bottom left is called McLeese. It's unlikely, it's probably secure, but it's unlikely to ever be deployed because the compute resources to do it would just bring the internet down to a crawl. So we have to balance the security that we can expect for X number of years going forward with the performance on the majority of systems that we use today, which is more and more mobile cell phones. People aren't even really using laptops or desktops anymore. So that's a consideration for things like battery life.
So Denis,
yeah.
For if an enterprise knows this issue and they're just starting to explore quantum security, what are some recommended first steps that you have that or you think that they should take to start protecting their data and start accounting for this?
Yeah, most big enterprise has already gone through a compliance industry process where they had to categorize their data. What's really sensitive because there's a HIPAA requirement for it. What's highly valuable and on our air gap system and all that. So they've done the categorization process. So now they have to start thinking of what are the first data sets, whether they're data channels for data in transit or static data that's in a repository that needs to be transitioned. That's the first step. The second step in that is now you have to designate a team. Who on your team is going to be responsible for this for the next 10 or 15 years. You have to have a set of experts that is following this industry, knows what's coming, and can start those proofs of concept to test these systems, get familiar with them, look at what the impact will be on simple applications that have to run on a mobile device. All these things are really important to start now because it's going to take a really long time. And if a big quantum computer comes online, I'll say a few words about this at the end. Tomorrow, it's we call it a black swan event. It's not something that we saw gradually progressing. It just happens all at once. We can't convert the entire internet and the digital economy into a post-quantum secure state. That just can't happen quickly. There's no way to do that. Even if best case scenario, if we could somehow pull this off in 10 years, that's huge amounts of systems. That's huge amounts of hardware that has to be ripped and replaced. Huge amounts of software package. Think about the way we did software 10 years ago, these monolithic designs. Everything's hard coded in. The people that made that software have retired a long time ago, or they moved on to another company. We have to go rewrite all that code and incorporate these new libraries. That's an enormous challenge. So if we don't start now, we're going to be in a lot of trouble a few years from now if, God forbid, one of these adversary nations has a quantum computer and we don't. The world's going to look very different.
I just literally just mentioned that to my mom the other day. I said, hey, if you ever want to have a 100% secure job, get fluent in COBOL and Fortran, because all the financial institutions and government run on COBOL and Fortran, and they've never, like that transition. Yeah, some places aren't even transitioning, so yeah, it's going to take a while for sure.
And not just like that, some places still have TLS 1.1, deployed in production, and triple DES and other weaker crypto systems.
Yeah, man.
So many of these have already been deprecated, but again, the people who even know where they are long gone. They can't. I mean, it would be a whole engineering process to go look for them and then fix them. So we talk about it as another first step beyond categorization of your data and prioritizing high value data for transitioning, as doing the crypto inventory. There's lots of tools already on your network that you can do this with. Figure out where crypto is being used, what protocols there are, and what you need to really fix very quickly. It's just a very long process. We've heard two things from CISOs around the country. I won't quote who they are. One of them said that, look, if a quantum computer comes out tomorrow and China has it and we don't, my first step is to go down to HR and hand in my retirement papers. So that was not comforting to hear, because I do business with them, and I won't say it was. The other was that, look, a lot of people are just trying to survive the week. They're looking for their next job already, or they call it mowing the lawn for the next guy. And so this is a big, heavy lift. It's a hard thing that we have to face. But fortunately for quantum, it's become a front page issue. Every CEO knows something about it. It's asking questions. Hey, what are we doing about this? Certainly everyone in the Fortune 500 has very high awareness of it. And a lot of this is being driven by the government, which was kind of my next slide, where it may be an issue for your company for security. You might have cybersecurity insurance. You might have breaches that you can have covered, and it's probably cheaper just to pay a fine than it is to actually transition all of your network infrastructure to PQC network. But here the government is taking the lead on it. And it's, fortunately for us, and we love seeing things where there's bipartisan support. No one argues over this. Both sides of the aisle are super helpful in this case. And they've driven really national security memorandums. There's two major ones, 8 and 10, that came out just in the last 2 years. There's legislation, HR 7535, multiple executive orders that all effectively say the same thing. The entire U.S. government, every government agency, there's no waiver for this, will transition to post-quantum cryptography by 2035. By all accounts, that's incredibly ambitious and unlikely to happen, but that's what they're going for. And really, the government doesn't make hardware and software anymore, so that's everyone who does business with the federal government. It's all the hardware and software vendors that expect to continue doing business with them, selling products to them, doing remediation for these classical systems that they have to deprecate. So that's all of us. And if the government's forcing it on us, it's going to be the wider industry. It's going to be the financial industry first, of course, anyone with compliance requirement that's federally mandated, like HIPAA, FINRA, and so on. That's coming faster than we ever expected. And this was really recognizing, it's in the legislation itself, how much data our adversaries are already sitting on, how much they've harvested already. Reference what the head of NSA said before, which is how much of our IP has transitioned or transferred wealth from our country to another country. Well, they may not have to steal any more data to overtake our economy. If they can just decrypt, operationalize, and monetize the data that they're already sitting on, that's probably enough. So this is really about fixing things going forward, doing better in the future than we have done in the past, and really graduating from the model that we've been existing on. So the process is going to be long, and we're not thinking through all of the implications here. This is 5G networks. This is the Internet of Things. Things that operate with very small processors that didn't have any encryption at all. If you think about how much of our critical infrastructure just in the last few years was connected to the internet, sensor systems, control systems, how often they've been hacked, and how many refrigerators now, houses, these crazy stories of kids with a laptop, finding out that their neighbors have gone away for the weekend and they turn on all the heating systems and the water and make a mess of it. Well, that's funny and all. I mean, it's terrible. I'm not advocating for that. But think about that happening on a city scale. We're building smart cities now where people are not part of the equation. We have automated intelligence itself with AI. We're not going to be involved in that process. And once you can corrupt that data, interfere with the security of that channel, and make it do something nefarious, who's there at the switch to turn it off? It's being run by machines. So this is a critical issue for lots of industries that we didn't have to think about before. I didn't worry about, my electricity getting shut off by hackers. It was the tree that knocked down the pole across the street. And as more, again, of these classical systems that never had any security, they never had encryption on them, think about SCADA packs in factories and so on. These are all getting connected with very little security and thought going into the process in the interest of automation, in efficiency, driving efficiency, taking people out of the equation to operate these things manually. And so we didn't talk about a couple more things. One is going back to the issue of Q Day. This almost always comes up. What is my prediction? And I always start the process by reminding everyone that science is not a democracy. Everyone's opinion doesn't count. We don't all vote on a physics field theory or something in chemistry and so on. So it's really just a handful of experts who get to decide that. And it's really no different in quantum. It's the people who make quantum computers that will decide when the quantum threat is really relevant. And it's lots of ways to make qubits. So qubits are the fundamental unit of a quantum computer. Generations ago, we had Moore's law. It's how many bits can you, or how many transistors can you pack into a single chip. This was driven by the economics of manufacturing wafers and chips in a factory. And Moore's law said that every 2 years or so, we will double the density of those transistors. We knew what a transistor was. We knew how to make them in standard boundary processes. Qubits were in a very different situation, and there's a couple things that make it that way. There's lots of ways to make qubits. There's lots of different technologies that we haven't even tried yet. We know about a handful of the ones, the superconducting and cryogenic qubits, the photonic ones, and so on. They all have their own version of Moore's law, and only the people building those systems will know when they're cryptographically relevant, when they'll be big enough, and when they'll predict when they'll be big enough to be able to break all of our encryption. They're the ones that know. So I see these surveys periodically in big papers, asking cybersecurity experts about it. Like, how would they know? They're asking me about brain surgery. When's the next generation of brain surgeons going to do, some amazing operation? I have no idea. I think it'll be 10 years from now. How's that sound? And so taking surveys like that is not really useful, and it's almost deceptive, lulling people to sleep in the public that this isn't a critical issue. And then, we open this conversation with the discussion like, well, we'll fix this, and it's going to take us a year to do this. It's going to take us 20 years. And so the point about science not being a democracy or consensus-based organization is really relevant to what we see in AI as well, and quantum and cryptography. we'll see a different scaling law, like Moore's law, for each type of qubit. But my personal opinion, and I'm not in the know, we're friends with all the other quantum companies, the quantum computing companies, and so on. But we don't really know what they're doing in their labs and how quickly they'll get there. They become very secretive about it because there's a lot of money involved in this. But the reality is that we think it's fairly short. And so if you look at the people that make quantum computers, like Google's CEO came out and said publicly that we think that this happens in 2 to 5 years. And he said that last year. So the time horizon keeps shrinking. If you think about 4 or 5 years ago, people are like, well, this is 20 years away. IBM scales up their next quantum computer. IonQ comes out with one. A few other companies are doing it. That keeps shrinking down. That never gets longer. So, 2010, let's say, everyone's predicting maybe it's 2050. So every year, it's progressively getting closer and closer. And in my personal opinion, it's not an exponential scaling law. It's not linear. It's a step function. There will be one type of qubit technology that will become dominant over all the others, and it'll go from 0 to billions of qubits very quickly. And there's one company out there, I'll mention them. They're called PsiQuantum, and that's exactly the approach that they're taking. They don't want to make 10 qubits and then 100, then 1,000, and so on. They're starting off with the premise that they can use standard foundry techniques and technologies to build a 1 million qubit machine. That's the first machine that they're going to build out the gate. There's another piece that's very difficult to quantify, which is that what is the actual measure that's useful in quantum computing? Well, there's two types of qubits. There's logical qubits. Those are the ones that we use for computation, for performing Shor's algorithm, which is the one that breaks all of our cryptography. And then there's physical qubits. So with some models, you need lots of physical qubits to create one or control one logical qubit. In other qubit models, it's a 1-for-1 or a 2-for-1. So there's no way to compare the two by saying I have a 1 million qubit machine, but that 1 million qubit machine equals one logical qubit. So to quantify it a little bit more clearly, the modern encryption algorithm that we use for most of the internet is called RSA. We use a version called RSA 2048, which is a 2000-bit version. To use a quantum computer to break that version of our public key infrastructure, that asymmetric encryption system, you need about double or a little bit more than double the amount of logical qubits to do that. So that's a little over 4,000 qubits, let's say. So if you can read through all the traffic on this, the generation that we're in is called noisy intermediate state quantum computers, where they're very noisy. They make X number of logical qubits or not. That's where we're going to now. So when you see someone has 4,000 logical qubits in a PR release or a scientific journal article, you'll know that the internet's completely broken at that point. That anyone with access to those computers can pretty much read all of your email at any time. And the first thing that they'll do is go back and decrypt all of your traffic. And the number one target for that is the Bitcoin wallets with billions of dollars in them. And, that's the other crypto apocalypse that people talk about, that the first person with a quantum computer isn't going to use it to cure cancer. They're going to go out and drain the biggest Bitcoin wallets and monetize it. It's like what Dillinger said, that he robbed banks because that's where the money was. And, there's no money really in curing cancer. And historically, we used nuclear technology to blow up cities and make nuclear weapons before we cured cancer with it. Same thing can anticipated for quantum computers. So that's kind of the big picture stuff. I've left a lot out. I've left it open to some time for lots of questions. I probably raised more questions than answered for most of the people on here, but at least I hope you have a better sense of what quantum computers can do, where quantum cryptography is going, and why it's critical importance and how long it will take for us to reach that state. It's a national economic security issue. Don't think of it as just privacy, national economic security, or government and military secrets. It's really something relevant to our daily lives.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. I'm gonna look up more. I know we got to a lot of the links and docs and stuff that you gave me, and I was able to distribute some of those. If people did want to connect with you, what's the best way to do it? Go through your website, LinkedIn, Instagram. I don't know if you are TikTok famous, or what would be the best way to
connect
go
with
about
me on
that?
LinkedIn because we post a lot of stuff where we're talking at conferences. Go to our website. There's links there to get huge amounts of data, everything we've done, things that other folks have done that would be very useful to get really smart about this. We really need a domestic workforce to grow this industry. The the number of people that we're graduating every year that can work in our space and our domain is very small relative to the need going forward. You will have job security for decades if you get into the space. And if you look at what China is doing, they've centralized this process. They built a facility in Hefei, China, where they intend to graduate around 20,000 physicists a year to work just on these pillars of problems: quantum computing, quantum sensing, and quantum communications. They've built the largest the largest QKD network in the world in China. And we need to get there as well. We need more people to get involved and to, not maybe become influencers. Yeah, you can become an influencer in quantum. That's great because you get smart about it. But let's think about ways that we can get that workforce up. And we're involved in a lot of that. So if you're interested in doing an internship, you're interested in more information about quantum, we would love to hear from you. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn, connect with me. I'm posting stuff about where we'll be, a little bit of knowledge here and there that might be useful for your career, might be useful for the work that you're doing, maybe setting up that roadmap if you're more senior in your company, working on these systems, working on this long-term transition. We're always here and happy to help.
Awesome. So you mentioned conferences. Are there any upcoming conferences you're going to? Are you going to reInvent, for example, or anything else on the horizon?
I think we are. It's just been a crazy conference season this year. We had 3 this week, so we've been on the road pretty heavily. Of course, quantum is really taken off as a top tier issue for the government, of course. So we're really focusing a lot on where can we help there, and then the financial industry and big network infrastructure companies. So Greg did a demonstration about the kind of things that they're thinking about. Look, these networks that we're using around the world, they're not AT&T. They're transiting networks that were built by Huawei and other people. We don't have the same level of assurances, legal and otherwise, that we would have if all this stuff was in the U.S. That's just the world that we live in. Yeah. We have to adapt, and we need more people to get involved. Go to the National Science Foundation websites or the Quantum Economic Development Consortium, huge number of resources there as well. If you want to get involved and learn where to go to school, what kind of courses you can take, there's a huge amount of free courses that you can take at big universities to learn enough about it to be able to start that journey. It's a long-term journey.
Yeah. The Cloud Security Alliance, Denis, your work there too, and that the Cloud Security Alliance. Yep.
So we have visibility into almost all of these organizations. The Cloud Security Alliance and most of these big company organizations have a quantum team that they're trying to educate and prepare for this transition, which again is just kicking off in full bore starting in January. It's going to be a lot of people getting involved very quickly. It's going to be a heavy lift. It's big budget stuff. So love to see more people get involved, and we're always very happy to help you. If you're ever in New York City, the view behind us is the Hudson River, and you can see Hudson Yards and the Empire State Building and stuff. We love visitors to get a couple selfies overlooking Manhattan and even New Jersey.
Yeah, we had someone earlier mentioning it and asking where you were. I think we got it answered for him. But yeah, I noticed the sun went down. Obviously, you're in. So what time is it over there? 7 o'clock.
It's almost 7. I don't know if while I was chatting, you could see the sun setting behind us. It's kind of beautiful.
Yeah, we saw it.
The whole city lights
awesome.
up in the orangish glow, and the horizon sinks. And we always look for the green flash. We haven't seen it yet, but
Nice, cool. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Qrypt, and thank you, Denis and Greg, and my co-host Tiffany. One more time, please take our survey. I have it pinned up at the top. Please let us know what you liked on our show, what you want to see more of. And also, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this. In the survey, if you would like to leave your email address, we can pass that along to Denis and Greg. If you want to connect with them beyond LinkedIn, I can pass that on to them as well. So feel free to do that. Please, one of the things we did mention was unknown unknowns. That's a common thing we talk about here. How are we going to get better if we don't know what you want to do? So please help us out with that. Great. Last call. Any more plugs or comments from the room?
Go to our website. You'll find lots of fun stuff to go look at, and come see us at one of these conferences. We love it.
Yeah, the GitHub repo to me is the primary one, just because everything's there. If you really want to play with the tech, it's out there.
Cool. Awesome. All right. And thank you again. And please tune in next week, next Wednesday at same time, same channel, 2 p.m. Pacific time. We will have Antimetal. They are a cloud cost optimization platform. We all want to save money. It's one of the well-architected pillars. So please check that out, and we will see you then. All right. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Your time. Thank you.